Jey Uso is the number one contender for the Intercontinental Championship as he won the Fatal 4-Way match on this week's edition of WWE Raw from Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Jey defeats Ilja Dragunov, Pete Dunne, and Braun Strowman, who found himself in another tussle with Bronson Reed as Reed made his return, put Strowman through the table to kind of take him out of this match, and that allowed Jey to win the match and now set up the showdown with Bron Breakker for the Intercontinental title, most likely, you would think, at Bad Blood. And, as we talked about last week, it was a scenario where there were really only two winners here. It was either going to be Jey or it was going to be Dragunov, and it seemed like getting Jey to this point made the most sense because you had already built up, some of those previous backstage segments between Jey and Breakker to kind of, bring back the family history and those kind of things that Breakker has brought up each time that he has kind of, talked to Jey over the past several weeks. So Jey makes sense because we also tied it into the fact that Sami Zayn is going to be challenging Gunther for the World Heavyweight Championship at Bad Blood, and we'll get to that shortly. But Jey going after the IC title, Sami going after the World title, knowing your ultimate destination is to get those two back together in a tag team form or to have those two back together, to get to the Bloodline saga, which they were really pushing Survivor Series on this show because the tickets do go on sale on Friday. And we know, being, 2.5 months away from Survivor Series, the War Games match, which you figure will most likely include the Bloodline, both the Roman Reigns' version and Solo Sikoa's version. And so, you've still got a little ways to go to get there, to need Jey and Sami to be back together every single week. But for now, they go their own paths, and both will be challenging for a singles championship at Bad Blood. So thought it was a really good main event, which, given the people involved, that's no surprise. And I think it also, adds the intrigue moving forward. You feel like Dragunov's going to eventually get that rematch with Breakker. As he said on this show, he's got unfinished business with Braun based on how their last match finished. And, you also had the stuff continue with Bronson Reed and Braun Strowman. So we're probably heading towards another match of some sort between those two. And, the question will be, how are they going to top what they've already done with the stuff in the parking lot of the car and all of this? But they will find a way. I feel pretty confident. And so that kind of continues that theme there. Speaking of Pete Dunne, the other member of this match, we know that Sheamus attacked him backstage. So that's going to continue. So as we keep saying every week on Raw, it's something where you have all of these guys in different stories, multiple stories at sometimes. And, Jey's kind of the same way, right? As you have Jey getting involved here, making the save for the Judgment Day, or for Damian Priest and Rhea Ripley against the Judgment Day earlier on Raw. So I keep liking that aspect of Triple H in this era because everyone is not just, in their own little bubble with one thing going on. They interact with the universe around them. And I think that's the best way, to kind of present professional wrestling, is because you do have everyone who's not just there and doesn't, is oblivious to everything else going on the show. Like they actually, have friends that have matches elsewhere, and it's not just what's going on in their segment, and they don't, kind of acknowledge anything else. So I like that about it. So Jey gets his shot at the Intercontinental title. Will the Judgment Day be back for Jey, maybe, to cost him that opportunity? That's a good question. So, I think there's a lot you can work with here when it comes to Jey Uso challenging for the Intercontinental title, and we'll make our predictions as we get closer to Bad Blood as to whether Jey will actually win that championship. But nonetheless, Jey advances to take on Bron Breakker. Really good main event. Now we've got the showdown between these two, and the family history, no doubt, will be brought back into this, given the history with the Steiners and, of course, the history with Jey's family and the Bloodline. So there you go. Jey advances to get a shot at the title. And as we said, Sami Zayn was also a big part on the show, as Sami came out to defend the honor of the one and only, the best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will be, according to most people, not to Gunther. Bret the Hitman Hart made his return to WWE television on this week's Raw. I was kind of wondering going into this. I'm thinking there's one of two people that Bret Hart's going to find himself in the ring with on this show. And I said it was either going to be Drew McIntyre or it was going to be Gunther, because both made a lot of sense. And when you really, go back and listen to how WWE kind of set this up on a tee last week, Sami was bringing up the history and the lineage, right, of people who had gone from being Intercontinental champions to being world champions. And one of the names he mentioned was Bret Hart before we knew that Bret was going to be on the show. But if you put two and two together, you kind of understood this was a great way to bring Bret back into it because it was in Calgary. And so Bret's here, and the line of the night, the one that has everyone talking, and I thought it was just one of the best deliveries you could have in terms of setting it up. Gunther telling Bret Hart that he was his second favorite wrestler of all time. And, you're thinking, okay, this is Bret Hart. We know who Gunther's going to say is his number one favorite wrestler. It's got to be Shawn Michaels, right? No. Instead, it's Gunther saying that his favorite wrestler of all time, Bret Hart, a close second to the one and only Bill Goldberg. And we know all the history between Bret and Goldberg and all that. So I thought that was just a tremendous line. And I keep saying, Gunther, there were a lot of people, I feel like, for the longest time, yes, they were praising Gunther's work in the ring in terms of the wrestling and just the technical prowess and all those things that he brings to the table as an actual competitor. But I kept thinking, once this guy figures it out in terms of the promos and once people really, I think, appreciate the delivery and the style, and he's come so far, right, from the very beginning. And we're talking back in the NXT UK days. Like, he didn't have to be someone who was delivering promos on a regular basis. Now, as the world champion, he does have to be that. And he has just become so fantastic. The cockiness, the confidence, and again, how he delivers it, it has just become one of my favorite things on Raw each week with Gunther. And I thought it was perfect to pair him up with Bret Hart here to kind of push that Gunther is the best, there is right now, and Bret is, the has-been and all of this other stuff. So I thought that was a great way to go about it, and they did, invite the opportunity for Sami Zayn to come out and defend Bret and keep pushing at that idea that Gunther is a coward and he will not face Sami because we all know why, because Sami's the one that's beaten him. And I think that is kind of a fun thing to play with here in terms of the story. Because remember, we still got a little ways to go from Bad Blood, right? Like we still got, 3 weeks or whatever. So there's some things you kind of have to make this a little bit of a slow burn over the next couple weeks. But we know Gunther's going to eventually, be ready to step up to the challenge. But for now, I think it's kind of great the way they're playing it by having, continuing to remind people and remind Gunther that Sami did beat him, and I think that's only going to kind of add to, the fuel for this story as we get into it. But nice to see Bret Hart back, and I thought, as always, I think anytime when you think back to 1997, you think about where things were with Bret Hart and the WWF after Survivor Series and, just how many sort of things along the way, and to finally get Bret Hart back in 2010 and now, have him being able to come out on a Raw in 2024. It's pretty awesome to see because there was at one point, 27 years ago, where probably a lot of people never thought that was going to happen. But here we are, and Bret's back, kind of nice to kind of have him involved here in a top storyline with the World Championship, which, again, given Triple H's respect for the lineage and those kind of things. I'm glad they didn't just add him into, one of those things that really didn't feel like it was up to Bret Hart's standards, right? Just to have him on the show. They put him in the world title segment here with Gunther and Sami, and I like the way they played that up. So, we know we're headed towards it. Gunther and Sami Zayn for the world title, and now we see when Gunther finally decides that he is going to step up and challenge, or accept the challenge of Sami Zayn. So, elsewhere on this show, you did have the official announcement, which we all knew was coming, of the Hell in a Cell match between CM Punk and Drew McIntyre for Bad Blood, the trilogy, and it will finally culminate in the only match that it should culminate in, and that is Hell in a Cell. And I think the difference now is that it used to be when you had Hell in a Cell as the actual, PLE name, pay-per-view name, you knew that you were getting multiple Hell in a Cell matches no matter how big the feuds were or how heated the feuds had gotten. Now, you actually have a match that is built for Hell in a Cell, right? This is a rivalry where you should do a Hell in a Cell match. And so it was so lopsided for all those years. And, obviously, I've never been a huge fan of the themed pay-per-views or PLEs outside of Money in the Bank. I think that one makes the most sense. But, when you talk about whether it was Hell in a Cell or Extreme Rules or any of these others, like, I just thought you're shoehorning sort of the theme into the rivalry versus what it should be, which is the opposite, where the rivalry should meet kind of what, the stakes are of the match. And again, a Hell in a Cell match should only be reserved, in my opinion, for matches that actually deserve it. And I think this is one, the third match, the final one. They will be done with each other after this, at least for the meantime. CM Punk, Drew McIntyre, and I mean, this was the way to do it, right? And, they certainly had the tease with McIntyre going over to Wade Barrett, making it clear that nothing is off limits for Drew McIntyre at this point. That's his friend Wade Barrett, but Barrett tried to stop him when McIntyre's, trying to finish CM Punk once and for all. And so the match is official. We'll talk more about it as we get towards Bad Blood. But, this is, again, it's one that they had to do, and I'm really curious to see how do we get there, over the next several weeks. Like, what else can be done between these two to really add the fuel to what should be a very memorable match. And I think you fully expect, too, this to be the main event of Bad Blood. And I think that's where, as you start to look at expectations for that show, we've talked about in other videos, what's Cody Rhodes going to be doing there? It is in Atlanta, but I don't necessarily think Cody's going to be the main event, maybe. I think it may be this, CM Punk versus Drew McIntyre, Hell in a Cell match. Seems to be the most likely option, again, to really play up the idea that this is, to me, it's been the best feud in WWE this year, and I think you kind of want to give it its final send-off here in that main event spot, because what's going to top a Hell in a Cell match between, the most heated rivalry in the company this year? I don't know if there's anything. Like, sure, you could do Cody Rhodes versus Jacob Fatu or something like that, and it would feel huge, but I think you're going to see, the bigger stuff for the Bloodline and all that reserved for Survivor Series and on. So, could definitely see this being kind of the headliner for Bad Blood. It meets all the criteria with CM Punk and Drew McIntyre. So that was official on this edition of the show. And elsewhere, some of the other stuff that you had on this week's edition of Raw, the Wyatt Sicks opened up the show with a pretty lengthy street fight in the 8-person tag, getting the win over American Made. And I think, this is something, too, where you kind of have, that scenario where, as we always said, it was something that had to get in the ring at some point. And, I thought this was commercial-free first hours. You have to remember that, too. So they probably had to make this match a little bit longer, perhaps than they wanted. But, it was kind of all action, right? And I think having the street fight made it the best option. We couldn't just do a regular straight-up match, kind of given where this had gotten to as well, right? With sort of the rivalry between Chad Gable and Uncle Howdy and the Wyatt Sicks and all that. So, giving them another big win here. And as I keep saying, I know this isn't for everyone. I know not everyone is fully invested in this, but the crowd is still behind them. And they continue, to be pretty into this Wyatt Sicks group. And so we can say all we want about how it feels so much different from the rest of the show, but the fact is, the crowd is eating it up. And I think that as long as that continues, this is going to be a featured part of the show. And I don't know that's going to be a featured part every single week, as we talked about before, but it's picking your spots and kind of having those opportunities to do these kind of matches. I don't think they're going to wrestle every single week, but that's okay. They shouldn't have to, based on kind of what you're presenting them as. So now the biggest thing is we see where both factions go from here. And I think really, we see what happens with the Wyatt Sicks, because you feel like this was kind of the end of things, because it was a pretty definitive win here, doing it in a street fight. This felt like sort of a blow-off match here. And where did American Made go from here? Because I know a lot of people, we've talked about it, right? Chad Gable felt like he was on the ascent there for a while. Now, kind of the breakup with Alpha Academy, he goes in this American Made stuff, and it's really only been connected to the Wyatt Sicks. And so how do they kind of, maybe rebuild Chad Gable up a little bit here with this group? Because I still continue to be impressed by Gable. I think he's got, the mannerisms, the character work, all of that. But where do you go from here? Because you would seem like both are going to move on from this and get to something else. But, we'll find out, because I think that there's still a lot you can do with Gable and American Made, and you feel like that they still have expectations, perhaps high expectations for him, but they just were not bound to win this feud based on the story that they were telling with the Wyatt Sicks. You couldn't have American Made beat the Wyatt Sicks in this feud, because it wouldn't have made any sense based on, again, kind of how they presented them from the start. So, so that was, again, kind of, I thought, a really fun opener, to have a street fight, and it's commercial free, so just let these guys and women go at it for as long as they did. And so that was the way things started. And then, of course, you did have the Judgment Day stuff where, once again, it was really, as you guys know, I keep bringing it up. I'm like, it's like ping pong, right? Like, it's just back and forth, back and forth. It has to tilt this way, then it has to tilt the other way in terms of the momentum with this feud. And, we've kind of seen the back and forth with Damian Priest and Rhea Ripley and the Judgment Day. And this time around, I kind of said it going into the show. I did a YouTube Shorts on it or whatever, and I'm like, hey, now it's time for the Judgment Day to get their momentum back, right? Yes, they injured Rhea last week, but you kind of saw Priest and Rhea and Jey standing tall. Now, they had to get their comeback. They had to get a little bit of their revenge and really make a statement. And I thought that's kind of what they did here. You even, heard them talk about that in the backstage vignette before the main events, where you had Balor just saying they were sending a message to everyone, not just Rhea and, Damian Priest, but also, to the New Day, who we know are going to be challenging Balor and Jade McDonough for the WWE Tag Team Championships or the World Tag Team Championships next week on Raw. And so, yeah, the LWO involved and all that. You had Dominic beat Dragon Lee. So all those things on the show where you had the Judgment Day, as I've said, really needing to continue to sort of legitimize what they are as a group. And we also had the announcement, which you guys know I've been pushing for. I'm like, they got to do this. They got to do it. Yes, we had the announcement of Rhea versus Liv, which we knew would happen, but we also had the official challenge and accepting Damian Priest versus Finn Balor for Bad Blood. Because I just think this is a great opportunity, to where, in my opinion, Priest can take the loss here by having the Judgment Day shenanigans or whatever, but I think you need Balor to have a really big win somewhere along the way. Now, the question is going to be, as we get closer to Bad Blood and we make our predictions, of those two matches, Rhea and Liv Morgan, Priest and Balor, who wins, who loses. Like, I don't know if you can have either side sweep those two matches. You might have to split it, but who wins what match? Like, I think that's going to be kind of the fascinating part to see where we go with that. But we did get that made official. So, like I said, this Bad Blood is setting up to where the history between all the participants, whether it is, they're really building up, as we said, stuff with Jey and Braun now, trying to build a little bit of the backstory, but that's kind of on the lower end when you think about everything else that's on there. Punk versus McIntyre, Priest versus Balor, Rhea versus Liv, and so forth. And so, I'm really excited with Gunther versus Zayn. Look, there is a backstory built in with a lot of these matches, and I think that's where this may feel like a show that is not equal to, a SummerSlam or a, Survivor Series, Royal Rumble, so forth, but they're building it up to be a pretty special show here when you think about kind of what the card could look like. So I'm really excited the way they built this up, and I think adding Priest and Balor makes a lot of sense here. You've got Judgment Day back with a momentum. Now how does it swing back in the favor of Priest and Rhea? We will find out coming up. But elsewhere on the show, I think, everything else was pretty, kind of what you expected. Bianca Belair and Jade Cargill successfully defend their titles against Alba Fire and Isla Dawn. You guys know my thoughts. I think they're getting back to that match against Baszler and Zoe Stark, who were also on the show as they were in that, 6-woman tag with the returning Natalya, who teamed up with Lyra Valkyria and Zelina Vega. We knew Natalya was going to be coming back. Now, I think, everyone was sort of expecting maybe Natalya to turn here and join the Pure Fusion Collective. I still think that's something that is probably on the table, but for now, give her the win in Calgary, and you can maybe save that for another time to get there. But that was, again, kind of expected for her to be the partner there. That was really, again, your sort of, biggest stuff on this week's edition of Raw. Really, as we said, the thing is, and I keep saying it, what I really like about Raw is that everyone kind of feels like they're connected to different stories, and they're not just, in their own little universe. They all kind of interact with each other in different ways. And so even though this person has this going on over here, well, there could be something that brings them back into it over there, like we said, just like with Jey and that kind of stuff. So I really like that. And speaking of something else I like, I'm sure you guys saw the announcement. Raw is moving to 2 hours starting in October until they go to Netflix. Because, as we said, the deal with the USA Network is going to be up. So they did announce, WWE did, that Raw moving to 2 hours in October. I don't remember the exact start date. I'll have to look that up, but you guys have probably already seen it. I can't remember it off the top of my head. But we know that's going to be kind of that, October, November, December, that holds you over on the USA Network until they get to Netflix in January. So how weird is that going to feel? That Raw is going to be 2 hours, because we are so accustomed to now, for over a decade, this show has been 3 hours every single week. It's wild to think about that there actually was a world that existed where Raw was 2 hours, because it feels like it has been 3 hours for a century. But we're going to get 2 hour Raws. And I think that'll be interesting to see maybe some of the changes they make during that period where you do have this at 2 hours. Because, as we said, there's a lot of stuff on this show. I think that it'll be interesting to see how they kind of, kind of tighten that up a little bit, given the time limitations and stuff of a 2-hour Raw. But I welcome it because I think even though SmackDown is not the best show right now, I think Raw is clearly the best show each week, but it's still 2 hours versus 3 hours. And so, yeah, we'll see how that plays out. But there you go, guys. There are my thoughts on this week's edition of WWE Raw. As always, share your thoughts in the comments. Let me know what you thought about the show, and always appreciate your feedback. And be sure to hit the subscribe button, hit the like button on your way out. And again, let me know your thoughts on this week's edition of WWE Raw.